So much of non-inclusivity is about fear. Fear of, I don't want to be like that.
We should not have less expectations of a person with a disability than we do of a person without a disability.
People with disabilities didn't go to my schools, and they didn't ever work with me, and they were very rarely in my synagogue.
Before this year, I had never had any direct contact with kids with autism. I'm not generally intimidated, but my nerves were circulating my stomach just thinking about the task ahead.
Tzedakah is a practice about opening one's heart, essentially. And what this is about, inclusivity, is also a practice of opening the heart.
I go into a crowded room, people hovering around me. I'm basically looking at people's belly buttons or the other side. They are hovering around me, eyes averting away from me, pretending that they don't see me, moving away at an unwanted distance as I approach.
We need to be making a paradigm shift. And the paradigm shift is not about, oh, isn't it nice that we're compassionate, that we include people? But it's about learning what we have to gain by inclusivity.
I thought I was the only one who got yelled at in school because I couldn't maintain eye contact with the teacher, and he would yell, "Look at me when I'm talking to you, Carly," or something like that. And then you go and find out that other people have had the same experience. One of the things that an individual on the autism spectrum usually goes through their life trying to attempt is to explain themselves to the rest of the world. Most of us would agree that autism is about communication. It's about us getting the signals wrong from somebody else and trying to send the signals out to the rest of the world. You know, it's been analyzed as a language, as a separate language, and learning a different culture.
There's also peer pressure involved. If I want to gain this person's esteem, I'm not going to relate to this person who appears or sounds like X, Y, or Z. So there are many factors, both cultural, mainly cultural, that enters into our attitudes about people with disabilities.
We don't like to be confronted with our own frailty. We don't like to be confronted with our own mortality. And that's one of the reasons that we keep people far away who are different than us.
Those who do approach me do not necessarily want to find out what I do. They don't necessarily want to know what stock tips I could give them for the day. Instead, they approach me, asking me, is there anything I need? Okay, so even when I am approached, I'm approached as an individual in need.
We are talking about a spectrum that at one end might have somebody wearing a head restraining device and diapers, nonverbal, who has to sit in a home somewhere. And on the other end of the spectrum, there are books that are now diagnosing people like Albert Einstein, Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Edison, Emily Dickinson, I have a long list I can give you, as having had diagnoses along the autism spectrum. And then there's all of us in between. We also like to think sometimes that this spectrum is going from low expectations to high expectations, but it's not. It goes from low expectations to unmet expectations, because sometimes those at the higher end of the spectrum display verbal ability and cognitive ability and talents that are sometimes quite extraordinary.
What I realized as my husband and I grappled with the seriousness of his issues is that we needed a counter-narrative by which to help him in his life and help us in our relationship with him. And for us, that counter-narrative was, and God created human beings in God's image. In God's image, God created human beings. And the reason I needed that narrative is that every day, I think our society tells us that those who don't excel are less than. My son is weak in reading and writing, he can't run as fast, and he began to be seen in our eyes and everyone else's eyes in negative terms rather than positive terms.
This is the fight that we're embedded in now, is to put more positive iconography to these words so that people will not be ashamed by their diagnosis, so that employers and professors and whomever will be much more behaviorally permissive in whom they let into their environment and who they welcome because it's federal law, and because whom they welcome because they know in their hearts that it's the right thing to do.
Once I started to see him as in God's image, I realized how very spectacular he was.
We need to be able to look at that fear and understand that by embracing our frailty, embracing our mortality, we become a bigger human being. We become a greater person every time we do that.